Hello, and welcome to A Swift View on Health. My name is Scott Schoenvogel, and today I'm going to talk about just some important industry articles that came out this past week, trying to point out some cost and some insurer trends where I just want to give you a little perspective. So we're going to talk about affordability, blame that's being pointed at insurers, how that's translating into some network pressure and how some people are thinking about changes to networks. And then finally, looking at completely alternative platforms for traditional employer commercial insurance coverage. So, just looking at affordability, Gallup has run a poll that talks about and looks at whether Americans feel cost secure. And I think they were pretty shocked to see that from 2022 to 2025, that Americans who felt cost secure with their health insurance dropped from 61% to 49%. So that was almost 3 million people. And along with that drop, the major concern is starting to really orient around prescription drug costs. So those concerns rose from 30% to 42% over that similar time period, and are really pointing to a broader healthcare market shift. We're seeing more treatments and diseases be impacted, at very expensive levels in some cases by medications. And so managing medication costs and utilization, understanding how medications are coming to market and impacting our healthcare system is really becoming a very important part of the overall kind of healthcare strategy framework. So, with this increase in, in insecurity related to healthcare coverage, a lot of that is around, just the perpetual, continuous rising. It just seems relentless, the rising cost of healthcare, and people are, really trying to figure out who's responsible for this, and a lot of that focus is on insurers, and so there's some great statistics here where 47%, so almost half of of the population thinks health insurers are the problem in healthcare, and that they're making the costs go up, and that they have within kind of the healthcare process and decision making, they have too much control or authority. So that's really, as we've talked about before, those things like prior authorization, and other controls that they have in terms of coverage, is it covered or not, that really frustrate people. And with costs expected to go up, I think PricewaterhouseCoopers, we've talked about between 7 and 11% this year, and they're kind of right in the middle at 9 in terms of how costs are going to increase in 2027. This 9%, something around there every year, as that compounds upon itself, really starts to create a very unsustainable dynamic, and people need to solve that challenge. I think that the perspective that I wanted to share here is that, in my opinion, health insurers are probably not, the major driver of all that healthcare cost. And particularly a wide majority of the market today is self-insured, meaning that your employer pays claims directly. So the health insurer, while they're responsible for negotiating contracts and building the network, the cost for using that insurer is about $35 an employee a month, on average. And so, $35, per employee per month, like, everything outside of that is really the cost coming in from the providers and from the medications and just all the utilization that's out there in the marketplace. And I can assure you that, as hard as insurers fight to try to keep those costs down, the kind of the community that's providing care is fighting just as hard to push those costs up. Um, and so really, looking at there in terms of the level of care that we get, the lifestyle that's driving that care, um, and just the utilization, how much care, we need. A lot of that is actually outside the insurer's control. And while no one is without responsibility for dropping the overall cost of care, it's just a much more nuanced type of situation. And we need to think about our healthcare system a little bit more broadly when it comes to cost. Even though it's easy to attack the insurers, it's just important not to get stuck there. And kind of one of the ways that I think we're getting stuck a bit is that we are, trying to abandon, a lot of times the national networks that these major insurance carriers have created. And while Swift Health, believes strongly that there is a new model for networking that does combine and include elements like direct contracting, there will always likely be a place for the large national networks, particularly as a safety net that have been created. I mean, as you can imagine, contracting with, literally millions of providers across the country, it's an incredible endeavor that took, kind of many decades to fully get in place. And, as such, there's not really a way to give people flexibility to see those providers wherever they are in the country with some level of security. And so I think that there's always going to be a role for those traditional provider networks. And it's always going to be worthwhile to include that in your health plan strategy. We do need to look at augmenting that strategy with direct contracting and other direct care strategies. I think the smart strategists around healthcare plans and those models will have more of a blended approach to networks that gets them to their goal. And so we just want to recommend you do not abandon those large carrier provider networks in total. Finally, another response to this is that there's been a lot this week around, Democrats coming and seeking new solutions for affordability, and there's always going to be a lot of focus and ideas on that. And honestly, a lot of what we do here at Swift are look for new, cool solutions that bring that affordability. But there are certain proposals out there, for example, of opening up Medicare to be available to traditional commercial insurance populations and employers. And there would be some real benefits to that, from a cost standpoint. However, I think that there's a real challenge there in that much of the rest of the healthcare system and payment models today, particularly on the employer or the commercial front, actually go a long way to subsidizing those lower Medicare costs. And so we just have to kind of keep in mind that if we moved without other kind of considerations or adjustments, to a Medicare for all, or a government healthcare policy, we might find ourselves really struggling to balance, those costs that over time have been built into the system. That, at the end of the day, lower per unit fee schedules, that's what exists in Medicare, can help, but they're not going to be the long-term sustainability answer that we need to focus on, around kind of incentives and shifting of risk and, how to deliver care on a more accountable basis and to create something that one is we can really lean into for a model that will help us embark on, kind of a new era of healthcare that actually becomes, affordable and where costs go down over time instead of going up every year over time. So we've got a lot of great ideas around that. Please reach out to Swift if you'd like to hear more about those ideas. But once again, a lot of things in the news this week that make us feel like, that there's easy people to blame or potentially easy solutions out there. These are hard problems that require a lot of careful thought, and so let Swift help you find those cool innovators that are out there in the market that are bringing really thoughtful solutions to these challenges. So as always, we appreciate you listening today. As we say at Swift, stay cool and stay Swift.